Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. To close out March, we have a plethora of MMA events headed our way, including promotions like Cage Warriors, KSW, Bellator, Risen, Octagon, LFA, Fury FC, ACA, and A1 Combat. And then next month, obviously, the new PFL season starts up, and we obviously have those posted for you guys as well. Make sure you guys take full advantage of the over 3,200 fighter profiles we currently have posted on the archive, with direct links to past fights for all of the competitors on these upcoming events. Again, there's a reason why a ton of MMA cappers, analysts, commentators, coaches, and fighters utilize this service to ensure, like I said, they leave no stone unturned, researching all of the fighters, opponents, whatever it is that they need, so they're fully prepared for all these upcoming MMA events. 7-day free trial available as well. Check it out with the link in the description below. Once again, that is the MMA Fight Archive. All right, this weekend we're going over UFC Vegas 88, headlined by another heavyweight fight at the Apex. People are so over this, as am I, but this is another generic one where we got Tybura taking on Tuivasa. Obviously, you got the heavy hitting style of Tuivasa and then the all-around skill set of Tybura. Which will prevail? We'll find out this weekend. And a very lackluster co-main event, in my opinion, between Brian Battle and Loosa. If it was somewhere else on the main card or even on the prelims, I'm sure a lot more people would be hyped for it. But it seems to be a very mediocre fight night that we got for us this weekend. But regardless, 13 fights to break down, 13 betting opportunities. Let's see which ones we can hone in on and try to take advantage of. All right, before we get into it, let's go over the recap for this past weekend. We go 2 of 2 on Lock of the Night predictions over ACA, PFL, LFA, and the UFC. On Thursday and Friday for LFA and PFL, we were up about 10 units, and then we had to give most of it back this weekend with the UFC and ACA. Still up about a unit or so, maybe 2 units on the weekend, but still definitely want to be further ahead considering the amount of action that we had. But let's hone in on the UFC event, which is what we normally do here. The lock of the night was Benoit Saint-Denis, and he ends up having a solid first round, but unable to get the job done as the resiliency, veterancy, and experience of Dustin Poirier comes through and allows him to go out there and knock out Benoit Saint-Denis in the second round. Even though we saw Poirier jump to his guillotine often, that probably would have put it in Saint-Denis' favor, but Saint-Denis was unable to capitalize on any of those opportunities and take home a finish. Luckily for Poirier, he's able to knock him out in the second round. So we take an L on the lock of the night. The dog of the night comes up short as well, as we had Michal Oleksiejczuk at plus 135 over Michel Pereira. I knew the first couple minutes would be a very tough ask for Oleksiejczuk to come out on top. I felt if that fight were to get into deeper waters, he'd be able to really wear on Pereira, really start to walk him down, land some body shots, and slow down the energetic and explosive style of Pereira. Unfortunately, we never got to see that happen, as Pereira did a great job in terms of jumping on Oleksiejczuk from jump and was able to get him out of there a couple minutes into that fight. Good work from Pereira. Unfortunately, we have to rip up the dog of the night ticket there. Now, in terms of percentages here, the lock of the night falls to 12 and 10 on the year for 54%. Again, a far cry from what our lock of the night record was in 2023. Need to get back on the horse. No rushing it. We'll get there when we do. Dog of the night drops to 7 and 16 for 30% on the year. I believe it's a minus 24% ROI, so it could definitely be worse, but we definitely got to get back on the horse in regards to our dog of the night plays as well. It's very unfortunate considering the dogs that we ended up hitting on the card still. I just gave the dog of the night moniker to the wrong person. So let's go down the list here. Plus 110 on Michael Venom Page comes through for us as he goes out there and puts on a clinic over Kevin Holland, who had some decent success when he was able to get the fight to the ground, but a lot of that came from Michael Page making some mistakes and falling to his back rather than Kevin Holland actually completing takedowns. I was very happy that Page showcased good defensive grappling, good takedown defense, and then absolutely destroyed Holland on the feet when he was able to get to range and get off on his striking. kind of what I expected that fight to end up being. Wish I had a little bit more confidence in it in terms of making him the dog than I play, but glad that he comes through for us. Jack Della Maddalena had a rough first 2 rounds, at least according to 2 judges' scorecards who had him down 2 rounds going into that 3rd round. But I knew for a fact that Gilbert Burns was not going to be able to keep up that level of dominance or grappling dominance once this fight spills into that 3rd round. And it pretty much went how I drew it up in terms of the fact that we would see Della Maddalena get taken down, have to deal with some adversity, but he would continuously provide resistance, which would gas Gilbert Burns out and eventually set up a 3rd round finish for Della Maddalena, and that's exactly what he was able to come through, and we were able to cash 2 units on that spot. Curtis Blades has a tough first round, but manages to pound out Jailton Almeida in the 2nd round, cashing us that -115 ticket. I was surprised to see the amount of love coming in on Almeida later in fight week, pushing Curtis Blades down to I think he was a +110 underdog by fight time, but I was still very happy to get him around that pick'em line to cash that ticket as well. Katlyn Chookagian goes in with a horrible game plan against Maycee Barber. She was training a lot of wrestling for this matchup, but after that first round, she should have known that she was not going to be able to complete the takedowns against the physically stronger woman. But for some reason, she continuously went into the clinch and grappling realm, allowing Barber to dictate pretty much where that fight was taking place, land the bigger shots, and ultimately win that decision. We saw when Chookagian was able to establish her range in the beginning of that 2nd round, she was going to have success with that 1-2 down the pipe and keeping her range. But for some reason, she felt inclined in terms of going back into the clinch where Barber was going to have the advantage. And we saw Chookagian, or Sermonara, I should say, go out there and take the loss there. So that's -1 unit there. Philippe Lins, again, another fight that I pretty much drew up to a T, even cashing on his decision prop at +600. He comes through for us at +110. I thought he was the better overall fighter. I thought for Culibao to have success in that fight, it would be him trying to get the knockout here. And there were some sticky moments where Lins was more than willing to engage in the pocket with Culibao, but he did a great job in terms of nullifying the majority of damage that Culibao was able to inflict there, allowing Lins to tie him up, land a couple of takedowns, do some good work on the feet, and really attack that lead leg of Culibao, slowing him down and showcasing better body of work over 15 minutes. Happy to cash him as a +110 dog, but even happier to cash that +600 by decision prop to get a little bit of more juice out of that squeeze there. The under 2.5 in the CJ Vergara and Asu Al-Mabayev fight does not come through for us. I had about 1.72 units there at -115. I really expected Al-Mabayev to get the finish once this fight hit the mat, but credit to Vergara in terms of being able to stay out of bad submission spots, not giving up his back to give up that rear naked choke. Clearly learned a lot from his Tatsuro Taira loss. Would have been nice if he made weight. Maybe that had something to do with it a little bit as well, but credit to Vergara in terms of staying out of bad positions and not getting finished in that spot. So we have to take an L on the under 2.5 there. And then I had small sprinkles on late round props for Marlon Vera. I felt if he was going to be successful in that fight at all, it would happen in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round. So I was happy to take shots at +1,800, +2,500, and +3,300. 0.2 units on each of those, but they do not end up coming to fruition as O'Malley delivers on what was probably his best body of work over 25 minutes to date, even over 15 minutes, showcasing that he is a superior striker and wizard when it comes to dictating range and the pace in which a fight is fought. So all in all for the UFC event, -2.53 units at -16% ROI. Again, taking the regional events into consideration this weekend, we're up about 1 to 2 units, but again, definitely want to focus in on what most people are interested in, and that's the UFC performance. So not happy with that performance all in all. Let's try to get back on track this weekend. As I said, obviously UFC Vegas 88. We got a couple regional events going down as well. 2 Cage Warriors events, one going down on Friday, one going down on Saturday. We also have a KSW event going down on Saturday morning/afternoon. So we'll have some action on that. If you're looking for breakdowns for those, I'll strictly be doing written breakdowns for those on the Patreon page. Check the link in the description below. Let's try to make it a good weekend for the regionals as well as the UFC. All right. Reminder, the Locky's two-step and Locky Trinity parlays that I normally drop on Thursdays to the public normally drop on Mondays Unfortunately, I'm dropping this podcast on Tuesday, which means the Lockheed Trinity and Lockheed Two-Step will be posted on the Patreon tonight. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Had a little bit of a hiccup in terms of my efficiency with doing my studying for the card this weekend, so had to push things back by a day or so, but still happy to get back on schedule with the Lockheed Two-Step and Lockheed Trinity being dropped on the Patreon tonight. So if you guys want access to that, check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page. And then lastly, GodzillaWins.com is where I am able to post my written breakdowns for you guys for free. On Thursdays, we drop our main event breakdown. And then on Fridays, we drop the top 3 moneyline spots for UFC Vegas 88. So if you're interested in that, check out the links in the description below. Once they are posted, I will be posting them there for you guys. Otherwise, check out GodzillaWins.com for all other sports as well. We're in the thick of March Madness right now as well, so you guys can take full advantage of those plays, as we have great writers, great cappers, great analysts, all dropping plays for you guys for free. Check out GodzillaWins.com. All right, without further ado, let's get into this 13-fight card that we have for UFC Vegas 88 this weekend, and we kick things off in the bantamweight division as we have, I listened to his name before I started recording this podcast, and I feel like I'm going to butcher it, but I believe it's Haralampos Grigoriou. He's coming in at -155. He goes up against Canadian Chad Anheliger, who's looking to buck a losing streak that he's currently on. But let's start off on the Grigoriou side, who picked up his UFC contract after a dominant victory over Carlos Smotherman on the Contender Series, where he knocked him out in a minute of that fight. This is a Longo MMA fighter who goes out there and showcases a karate/Muay Thai striking style. A lot of his strikes coming from his kicks, whether it's the flashy spinning moves that he likes to throw or the calf kick that he likes to implement and try to butcher his opponent, as he's been able to finish somebody by calf kicks or leg kicks, I should say, over the course of 24 minutes in a championship fight for, I believe it was Combat Zone or a CES, one of those promotions over there in the Northeast. He's a solid striker with good power, good speed, good footwork, has a decent wrestling game if that's something that he wants to rely on, but I don't think that's going to be his calling card inside the UFC. I have my question marks in terms of what his skill level and experience level will actually get him in terms of success in the UFC, but depending on how the UFC decides to match him up through his first couple UFC fights will really dictate how far he can make it inside the big promotion. On the flip side for Chad Anheliger, he's trying to get back on the winning track after getting submitted in the last few seconds of the third round against Jose Johnson back in November. And that was a fight where he had some glimpses of success, landing some takedowns, getting some top control time, and even having some success with his big power punching style. But it was ultimately the technical advantages that Johnson provided in that matchup that allowed him to land the bigger, better shots, allowed him to get the reversals on the mat and land some big shots from that top position. And he was up on all 3 scorecards going into that final round, but he left the judges out of it as he was able to secure the submission over Anheliger. Anheliger is, in my opinion, a kind of like a Canadian Darren Elkins type of fighter, but not so much reliant on his grapple-heavy approach. Normally, when he's in his groove, he likes to utilize his striking, putting big power on his opponents and trying to knock them out. He also has a knack for jumping guillotine, as he likes to latch onto that and fall to his back, but it hasn't really paid off for him at this level thus far. In this matchup between both guys, neither really jumps off the page in terms of a guy that I believe will be able to take command of this fight. What actually catches my eye is the fight to go to decision at +125. I think we're going to see both guys kind of going back and forth, but I think the one that will be having more success is Grigoriou, who should be faster, who should be a little bit lighter on his feet, and should have more explosiveness in terms of landing the big shots and making it look better for the judges. But Anheliger is a very difficult guy to put away. Unless Grigoriou can get this fight to the mat and showcase a superior jiu-jitsu game, which I don't think is really on the table, I think he just touches up Anheliger over 15 minutes and wins this fight on the scorecards. I'm just not too keen on his money line here around that -155 range. Anheliger could absolutely throw a wrench in his plans by landing some big shots, hurting him, and maybe even putting him away. But I expect this fight to go the full 15 minutes, and it will likely be Haralampos Grigoriou who ends up getting his hand raised on the scorecards. All right, let's move over to the women's strawweight division, where we got Jacqueline Amorim coming in at +110. The BJJ black belt goes up against Corey McKenna, who comes in at -130. Now let's start off on the Amorim side, who was able to get a successful first UFC fight or UFC win in her second fight with the promotion, as she went out there and finished Montserrat Ruiz in the final round of their matchup. That was a fight where we saw Amorim learn some lessons from her first fight in the UFC, where she had a great first round but had a horrible time in the second and third rounds against Sam Hughes, as she had a cardio dump and was unable to get off on any success of her own. Yes, she is a high-level BJJ black belt, but her wrestling game still needs a lot of work. Even in the Ruiz fight, we saw her jump guard to try to get the fight to the ground, and luckily for her, she was able to lull Ruiz into a situation where she was always able to pull off a reversal, end up in top position, and then eventually get the TKO finish in the third round. Her striking leaves a lot to be desired, as she still looks very uncomfortable in that realm. But when she's able to get fights to the ground, even with her on her back, she's very skilled in terms of nullifying the amount of damage her opponents are able to inflict on her, but eventually either throw up a submission or pull off a reversal where she's able to get the top position and do her best work from there. But I think she's still going to be lacking against fighters that are a little bit more well-rounded than her and can stop the takedowns and safely get back to their feet if she does end up pulling guard. And I think that's what she's fighting this weekend in Corey McKenna, who's currently riding a 2-fight winning streak. Last time around, McKenna fought back in 2022, so it's been a little time since she has stepped foot in the cage, but she pulled off an upset over Cheyenne Velismus, where she had a tough first round, but in the second and third rounds, she was able to implement her physicality by pushing Velismus up against the cage, landing some good shots, dirty boxing and knees, but then in the third round, dragging the fight to the ground, where she was able to land big shots from that top position while securing that guard position, not allowing the referee to stand up the fight due to inactivity. McKenna is a solid and well-rounded fighter. She's still only 24 years old, and she's doing a great job in terms of leveling up her skill set, especially with the amount of time now she's having at Team Alpha Male. That's done a great job for her in terms of getting good experience against high-level training partners, but great coaching in terms of really rounding out her grappling game, which seemed to be the bread and butter of her style, especially when she came stateside in the first place. I think that this is a fight that will see her utilize her grappling defensively, trying to keep this fight upright where she should have the striking advantage. She might get taken down, but I think her defensive grappling will be good enough to keep her out of any trouble that Amorim will look to put her in. I can't say that with full confidence, though, which is why I can't be uber confident in the minus 130 that we're currently getting on McKenna. I think that we'll see her willingly engage in the grappling in the second and third rounds as Amorim's threat and ability to finish fights starts to dwindle. I think McKenna will be the stronger of the two, and I think she can dictate where this fight really takes place. But I just have one minor slip up on the mat could allow Amorim to fully take advantage of this matchup and possibly even pull off a submission. So I don't have a whole ton of confidence here, but I think we'll see a patient and disciplined approach from Corey McKenna to go out there, grind this fight out, and win it on the scorecards. All right, next up, we got a featherweight matchup here between Joshua Culibao and Danny Silva. We got minus 185 on Culibao and plus 160 with a turn on the debuting Danny Silva. Let's start off on the Culibao side, who had his 3-fight winning streak snap last time around as he came up short against Lerone Murphy, who utilized a surprising style that we normally don't see from Murphy, and that was grapple-heavy approach. He was able to get the fight to the ground with some solid footwork, good striking, and then eventually masking takedowns behind it. But his ability to get the back of Culibao and control it in crucial situations allowed him to grind that fight out and eventually win the fight on the scorecards. Normally, Culibao showcases an aggressive striking style where he's able to walk his opponents down, utilize output, good, big, powerful strikes, a variety of striking combinations, whether it's with his punches or his kicks, and that normally allows him to break his opponents and finish them late, or at least win fights on the scorecards. His last 2 fights haven't really gone his way. And yes, he won the first of those 2 fights where he was able to submit Meerschaert Baghdasaryan, but a lot of that had to do with Baghdasaryan slipping up, allowing Culibao to get his back and eventually find that rear naked choke to get the victory that night. Culibao has a underrated grappling game, something that he can rely on against guys that don't really have the best grappling game in their own right. And that's what you might be getting here in the form of Danny Silva, who is a very slick boxer. This guy does a great job in terms of mixing up his combinations, walking his opponents down, targeting the body when he sees the opening there, and then mixing it up to the head when he sees the openings are there as well. This guy's been training with guys like Cub Swanson and Dan Argueta throughout his career, getting good guidance and mentorship through those guys. But I just don't know if he's UFC ready at this point in time, especially considering the lack of competition he's been fighting on the regional scene. He's beat some decent guys. Elijah Leggett, he was close to beating Kanan Kawaihai, but that was the fight that really made me believe that he's not ready for the next level at this point in time. Since then, he was able to knock out a super short notice replacement in the first round, and then he completely outstruck and pummeled Angel Pacheco, I believe the kid's name was, on the Contender series, but gave some spots for Pacheco to try to rally back and try to get back into that fight. Silva is clean and crisp on the feet, but he leaves some openings to either get taken down or countered effectively by other opponents. I think his opponent this weekend, Culibao, will be able to push him more than Silva has been pushed in the past. And I think a lot of the success that we'll see from Culibao this weekend is going to be with his pressure and eventual takedowns, where he should be able to take advantage of Silva on the mat. Silva has improved his get-ups and his ability to stop takedowns against a certain level of competition. But when he's fighting the higher level, which he's going to be getting this weekend, clearly the most skilled opponent that he's faced to date, he may struggle to keep this fight upright and may struggle even more to eventually get back to his feet. I think in trying to get back to his feet, we'll see an opportunity for Culibao to take the back of Silva, sink in a choke, and take that on home with him. So I do like Culibao here, and I was very surprised to see the Culibao submission prop around that plus 1100 line. I'm going to be taking a shot on that. But I do also like the under in this spot. I think Silva could potentially take advantage of some of the durability issues that Culibao might be suffering from. But also on the flip side, I think the large portion of this under hitting will be the fact if we see Culibao keep that forward pressure, stay in Silva's face, drag this fight to the ground, and sink in a submission similar to what he was able to do against Meerschaert Baghdasaryan. But maybe have more striking success than he had in the Baghdasaryan fight here. So give me Culibao by submission, but I like the under 2.5 most in this spot. All right, next up, lightweight division. We got Thiago Moises coming in as a heavy favorite at minus 360. He goes up against Mitch Ramirez, who comes in at plus 295. Now, Thiago Moises was scheduled to fight a different opponent here, but luckily for him, the UFC was able to find a short notice replacement for him to still compete this weekend. Now, last time around, we saw Moises get completely demolished by Benoit Saint-Denis, who was able to walk him down, keep him on the back foot, put him in uncomfortable positions, touch him up, and absolutely slice him up with some nasty elbows that opened up a nasty cut at the ending of the first round. And it was eventually in the second round where Saint-Denis was able to overwhelm him and get the TKO in the dying seconds of the second round. Moises has shown some improvements in his striking game with his technical ability, with throwing combinations together, touching his opponents up, and eventually mixing in takedowns behind that to utilize his BJJ black belt. But that's where he does his best work, when he's able to get guys to the ground and showcase that he can transition from position to position to eventually get that dominant spot that he needs to sink in a choke or even just posture up for a TKO. He's only 28 years old still, so I think even the losses that he's been accruing over his last 5 fights, he's 2-3 over those last 5, are great learning experiences for him to get better as he continues to work through the rankings of the UFC. Luckily for him, this weekend he's taking on a short notice Mitch Ramirez, who had his opportunity on the Contender series this past season to try to make it to the UFC, but was unfortunately unable to get that win as he came up short against Carlos Prates, who was able to finish him in the second round. We saw Ramirez bounce back on the regional scene for LFA, where he was able to knock out a previously undefeated opponent in Ariane Tavares, and that was a fight where he was able to keep the pressure on him, eventually land a big shot, and just stay on the ball by, even though Tavares was not going down, he continuously landed big shots, and the referee was forced to step in and get that standing TKO W for Ramirez. Ramirez normally relies on some wrestling to get that top position and pound his opponents out from that top spot, but he also does a great job in terms of putting pressure on his opponents with wide winging hooks and big power that he's able to present. I think Moises is the better striker of the two in terms of technically speaking. He should be able to touch up Ramirez down the pipe. But even if this fight does end up hitting the mat, I don't think Ramirez has good enough control to deal with the style that Moises will be providing off of his back with his submissions, reversal attempts, and get-up attempts. I do think that this fight spells a finish for Moises, who should be able to touch up Ramirez, eventually causing this fight to hit the mat. And then from there, I think we'll see Moises wrap up a submission and get the win, probably by the second or third round. All right, moving over to the flyweights, we got Jafel Filho coming in at minus 180. He takes on Ode Osbourne, who comes in at plus 155. Starting off on the Filho side, we saw him go out there and have a solid comeback victory over Daniel Barres. Now, that was a fight where we saw Barres hurt him repeatedly to the body in the first round, but in the same round, we eventually saw Filho put the power on Barres, and that caused Barres to slow down. That opened up a takedown opportunity for Filho, where he was eventually able to work to that arm triangle position and get the submission there. It was a great comeback victory for Filho, showcasing that he can meet adversity and get that comeback and eventually find the victory in his own right. He put up a decent fight against Muhammad Mokaev. A lot of people remember him for having that knee bar attempt on him deep in that third round, but was unsuccessful in getting the tap there. But normally we see Filho showcase a lot of leg kicks, a lot of power in those leg kicks to eventually open up the takedown, where he's able to do great work with his BJJ black belt, sinking in submission, in a very dominant fashion more often than not. His opponent this weekend, Ode Osbourne, is a guy that I've felt, honestly, has been overrated throughout his UFC career. Now, he's definitely better than I originally gave him credit for, but I still don't think it's to the point where we're going to see him really get deeper into the rankings or even anywhere close to a title shot, especially with him getting closer to 33 years old at this point in time. Last time around, he came up short against Asu Almabayev, who was able to put him on his back, eventually open up that rear naked choke and get the submission in the second round. But Osbourne is a guy that has mainly benefited from the physical attributes that he normally brings to the table. He's fast, he's quick, he has some good power, but we see that really start to fall off in the second and third rounds, which is why I think that we're seeing him really start to implement a grappa-heavy approach in his fights so that he can stay safe, really start to get some wind back into his lungs when he has that top position against his opponents. And that's how he's able to get his wins. But his last win against Charles Johnson, I think that was more so Johnson struggling to pull the trigger rather than Osbourne actually getting the dub there. We saw that fight clearly 1-1 going into the third round, but Johnson was just so hesitant in terms of pulling the trigger that I felt even if he landed 3, 4, 5 more punches, he possibly could have had that decision go his way. But Osbourne was staying safe enough from distance, throwing up enough output, in my opinion, empty output, nothing that really would have stopped the fight or caused Johnson a lot of problems if he were to get hit by them, which he did. And that caused Osbourne to go out there and just skirt out the victory late in that matchup. He is a guy that slows down late in fights. He is a guy that will give up these bad opportunities or bad spots to allow opponents to take advantage and eventually get their hand raised. This is a spot where I feel Filho can do exactly that. The early going is going to be tough. We'll see Osbourne put his power on Filho. I think he'll try to finish him early here to try to take out the chance of him slowing down later on in this matchup for Filho to take advantage of that. But I hope that we see Filho be a little bit more conservative early here. Land his kicks, try to stay safe at distance, maybe tie up Osbourne, try to wear on him earlier here, but then open up those takedown opportunities in the second and third rounds where he can utilize his superior jiu-jitsu to lock up a submission and get that victory here. So I do like Filho a good bit, but this kind of reminds me of Michał Oleksiejczuk against Michel Pereira last week, where we have to survive that early threat, right? Osbourne will be very deadly early in the spot with his knees up the middle, his body work. He might even try to target the body to try to take advantage of what Daniel Barres was unable to do last time around and close the show. But I think if Filho can stay safe enough, he will be at a huge advantage in the second and third rounds here. This could even be a live betting opportunity if you are too scared of Osbourne's finishing potential early here. I think we'll see Filho hopefully stay safe enough, keep that range, maybe crash the pocket, get in the distance, get in the clinch and really rough him up there. And then from there, like I said, in the second and third rounds, get his grappling going and then eventually implement a submission-heavy approach and get that tap. So I do like Filho here to get that sub, probably second or third round. I'll definitely be sprinkling the submission second round, submission third round props, as I believe that they were pretty high up there as well. So worth a shot, in my opinion. So give me Filho and Filho by submission. Our next up, bantamweights going out of here, women's bantamweights, that is. We got Josiane Nunes coming in at -135. She goes up against Chelsea Chandler, who comes in at +115. Now, both these women have had fights at 145 pounds in the UFC, but it's clear the UFC is trying to do their best to fizzle that division out and have these women come down to 135 pounds. And this is the division, maybe even 125 pounds, that Josiane Nunes should have been fighting at this entire time, considering that she's 5'2" with a 67-inch reach. But she is a very poor woman's version of Jessica Andrade. And the fact that she crashes the pocket with big winging hooks and more often than not looks to go out there and try to knock her opponents out. Luckily for her, the opponents that she's been facing have been low-level strikers or opponents that go out there and gas out trying to grapple her to the mat and are unable to get much success going when they're able to get her to the mat. That's why she's been able to go out there and win her last, 8 or 9 fights in a row. She has a lot of heart, she has a lot of resilience, and she has some good power in her hands, which opponents seem to get frustrated by, get intimidated by, and then eventually allow her to just get into her groove and let her do what she does best. Her opponent this week in Chelsea Chandler is a very tough out, and I don't think will go away so easily as Nunes' last opponents have done or have been allowing Nunes to do. We saw Chandler lose to Norma Dumont last time around, who was just a physically bigger, physically stronger, more experienced fighter who was able to put Chandler into bad spots, and Chandler didn't have much of an answer in terms of getting off of her back or at least working to a position where she can get back to having some success. Dumont just bullied her, plain and simple. She was the better striker, she was the better grappler, and she was just stronger in those positions. Normally, when Chandler is at her best, she's able to take opponents to the ground, do big work from that top position, and normally finish them too. She has a handful of knockouts on her record, a lot of them being ground and pound spots. I believe she started her MMA journey through jiu-jitsu, so she has a decent grappling background if she needs to rely on that as well. But it's really her physicality when she gets her opponents to the ground where she ends up doing her best work. And I think that's where we're going to see her successful here against Nunes. And I think that's why we've been seeing a lot of love come in on Chandler since the odds have dropped here. I think she was a bigger underdog and now finds herself at +115. I wouldn't even be surprised if come fight time we see this fight around a pick'em or even as Chandler being the favorite going into this matchup. But Chandler will have the clear grappling advantage here. And I think she has good enough to her ability to wade through any of the power that Nunes is going to be throwing at her, and she will clearly be the stronger, bigger fighter. She'll have a 6-inch height advantage, only a 1-inch reach advantage, but I don't think that's going to come into play here or matter too much, considering reach will be nullified once this fight hits the mat, which is where Chandler wants it to take place. Once Chandler gets it to the ground, I don't think she'll have much issue in terms of working to a dominant position. And I think that will allow her to posture up, rain down big shots, and get Nunes out of there by TKO. I really like Chandler here as an underdog, and I think she comes through relatively easily. All right, moving over to the lightweight division. We got Natan Levy coming in at +255, going up against Mike Davis, who comes in at -305. Now, let's start off on the Natan Levy side, who's currently on a 2-fight winning streak, last time defeating Guillermo Valdez, utilizing his patented grapple-heavy approach. Now, when you see him start fights, he looks like a striker. He utilizes a karate style, bouncing in and out of the range of his opponents, but it's mostly to set up the eventual takedowns where he seems to have most of his comfort. The majority of his finish, I believe all of his finishes, have come by submission, but you are seeing him start to go to a decision over his last couple of fights because he likes to slow them down, utilize his strength, take his opponents to the ground, and just nullify any type of threat that they'll try to show from there. But this is a guy that clearly starts to slow down later on in his matchups because he struggles to hold opponents down because he uses so much physicality and so much strength to keep them in those positions. His striking is not too shabby, but once he starts to slow down, once he starts to feel the grind of a fight, you see him start to make mistakes. But luckily for him, he's fighting guys that he's been able to take advantage of in those certain spots. Now he's going up against a guy in Mike Davis who is seen as one of the best fighters in the promotion, but his inability to stay active enough with competition has kept him from really reaching the rankings or even the top 10 where a lot of people believe that he deserves to be. He sat out all of 2023 due to shoulder injuries and knee injuries, but he says that he's completely healthy, ready to go, and is willing to go out there and fight at least 3 times this year, which is music to a lot of people's ears, considering how much potential people expect of him. He's currently riding a 3-fight winning streak where he's finished the first one, which was that mauling that he had against Thomas Gifford. But this guy is a guy that's very well-rounded all around, but I think he is best when he can implement his wrestling background and really smash opponents from that top position. He has a sneaky submission game as well when he's able to get dominant position and open up the arm triangle choke or the rear naked choke. But I just think this guy's so great all around. Great striker, but again, best when he's able to get his wrestling going. Now, in this matchup against Natan Levy, I feel like we'll see Levy try to lean on his striking a little bit more, knowing that he'll likely be at a deficiency in terms of the wrestling realm in the spot. I also wouldn't even count out the fact that Levy might try to wrestle Davis, but that's not going to work out for him, as I think Davis is the better scrambler. Davis has the better pure jiu-jitsu in this spot as well, and I think Davis is just better all around. This seems like a spot to me where we'll see maybe a little bit of competitiveness early on in this matchup, but as we get into deeper waters, we'll see Davis really start to pull away with this fight, landing the better shots on the feet, landing the better shots on the ground, and I think he eventually opens up a submission opportunity for himself in the second and third rounds, which I think he'll be able to complete here. Yesterday, I saw round 3 by submission at plus 2,800 for Mike Davis, which I think is absolutely appalling. It's obviously been bet down now to about plus 2,000, which I still think is a very good spot to get in on. But I think we'll see a back and forth grappling onslaught between both of these guys. But I think it's eventually going to be Davis who takes over probably later on in the first round, asserts his dominance in the second, and then eventually gets to finish in the third round by submission. All right, heading to the middleweight division, we got Gerald Meerschaert coming in at minus 240. He takes on Bryan Barberena, who comes in at plus 205. Now, let's start off on the Meerschaert side, who's riding a 2-fight losing streak. Last time around, he lost a split decision to Andre Petroski in a fight that I thought Petroski won pretty handily. Now, we saw them go back and forth in terms of their striking. Both guys were able to enjoy some top time in terms of their grappling. And we saw Meerschaert obviously start to take over in the third one. Petroski clearly starts to slow down, but Meerschaert also slows down a little bit. But luckily for him, he was fighting a guy that doesn't have the greatest gas tank in his own right. Before that, we saw Pyfer landing knockout on Gerald Meerschaert, showing us that there is potentially still some durability issues that we need to worry about with Gerald Meerschaert. Meerschaert is a guy that goes out there and normally likes to implement a little bit of an aggressive style. He likes to use his kicks. He's improving his striking, but the fact that he's a little bit slow in the striking realm leaves a lot of openings for his opponents to try to counter him or land their big shot before he's able to land any of his. But he does his best work when he's able to establish that top position on the mat and utilizing his BJJ black belt and trying to seek submissions, as he has so many on his record already. It's very difficult to deal with when he establishes that top position because his control, not too bad, but it's his knack for snatching up the neck of his opponents when they just even show a little bit of it. He's able to snatch onto it and try to submit them. But it's really just been his lack of ability to assert his dominance from that top position because of the lack of real wrestling that he has, in my opinion. I think his wrestling game is not the greatest, but when he's forced to strike, it really depends on his opponent's level of striking, whether he will be able to be successful or not. He's 36 years old, not really getting any faster, which I believe is going to be the ultimate reason why he doesn't really get to go on much of a title run, but he'll still be a very tough out for a lot of opponents. His opponent this weekend, Bryan Barberena, is a veteran in his own right, but is on the worst losing streak of his career thus far. He's coming off of 3 straight losses, most recently losing to Mahmoud Muradov, who was able to mix in a grapple-heavy approach to keep Bryan Barberena from getting off on much of his own success. Now he is 0-3 now, I believe, over his last 3 fights, which have all been taking place at middleweight, and a lot of that has been coming from his opponents utilizing grapple-heavy approaches. Now, Dos Anjos, great takedown specialist, mixes in his takedowns very well behind his striking. Gunnar Nelson, very high-level jiu-jitsu black belt as well, who was able to snatch up an armbar and get the tap. And then obviously Mahmoud Muradov, much bigger guy than Bryan Barberena, who was able to mix in his own takedowns behind his own technical striking, which is where he normally has an advantage over his opponents. Bryan Barberena is a scrapper, a guy that loves to throw down, throw big heat in his shots, but also has some decent top game of his own if he seeks that the takedown in his own way. He has been showing improvements in terms of working back to his feet when he does get taken down. His takedown defense is slowly improving as well, but I wonder what his success rate will be at middleweight, considering he's usually at a size and strength disadvantage against his opponents. Luckily for him, his opponent this weekend does not offer too much of a threat in terms of pure wrestling, which should allow Barberena to keep this fight up, where he should have the advantage over Gerald Meerschaert. Now, Meerschaert, I believe, will only have a 1-inch height advantage over him. Obviously, he might have a bit of a strength advantage, but I think that we've seen enough improvements from Barberena to potentially keep this fight upright, where I think he can put his power to use and showcase that Meerschaert could still be susceptible to getting hurt, getting hit, and getting put out. We know Barberena can put guys out. It's just as, being able to keep fights upright. And I know we're going to see Meerschaert try to get this to the ground, but there will be plenty of opportunities on the feet for Barberena to keep this competitive and eventually keep that knockout opportunity alive for him. So I'm kind of surprised that we're seeing Meerschaert in that -240, -250 range. Obviously, he will be very threatening once this fight hits the ground, but I think if Barberena can stay safe enough early, he should have an easy path in terms of keeping this fight upright, especially in the second and third rounds where he'll have a cardio advantage. And then from there, if he just lets go on his strikes, defends the incoming or eventual takedowns, and it continues to put the strikes and pressure on Meerschaert, he should have an advantage and potentially find that knockout. So I'm going to go with Barberena here to pull off the upset and possibly have that round 3 KO come through for us as well. So give me Barberena and Barberena by knockout. All right, moving over to the women's bantamweight division, we got Patty Kianzad going up against Macy Chiasson. Chiasson coming in as a big favorite here at -235 as she takes on Kianzad, who comes in at +200. And Kianzad is currently 1-2 over her last 3 fights, mostly having to deal with a lot of grapple-heavy approaches from the opponents that have been beating her, and that seems to be the kryptonite in most of her game plans, or at least in her style and whenever she's fighting these opponents. Kianzad is a solid striker. She utilizes good output, good volume, good footwork, combinations, but if she's unable to stop takedowns from her opponents, that's where she ends up finding herself on her back, where she doesn't do a great job in terms of working back to her feet so she can get back to the advantage that she normally holds in her fights. And that's been the large reason as to why she hasn't been able to build up much momentum in the UFC, because a lot of opponents have been able to expose that part in her game, and she's just unable to get off much offense. In her last fight against Ketlen Vieira, we saw Vieira utilize that grapple-heavy approach for 2.5 rounds until Vieira started to slow down, and Kianzad was finally able to pull off a reversal, but it was too little too late for her at that point in time, allowing Vieira to get her hand raised on the scorecards there. Now she's fighting a grapple-heavy fighter in Macy Chiasson, who was very close to picking up a victory in her last matchup against Irene Aldana. She dropped the first round, but it seemed like momentum was really in Chiasson's favor as she was able to get her grappling in the second round going, and then in the third round as well, until she unfortunately got hit by an up kick to the liver, which dropped Chiasson almost immediately and caused her to lose that fight. But Chiasson normally has success in terms of bullying her opponents, getting them to the cage, eventually to the ground, and then roughing them up from that top position. I don't think her skill set has completely caught up to the physical capabilities that she has inside the cage, which has been the large reason as to why she's been successful, in my opinion. But a lot of it also has to do with the fact that she's been struggling to make 135 pounds. She's had a couple fights fall through due to the fact that she couldn't make the weight. And even this fight against Irene Aldana, the last one she had, on fight week, she asked if it could be a 140-pound catch weight, which is what Aldana ended up agreeing to. And it almost came back to bite her in the ass, as Chiasson was able to use that extra weight to really hold down Aldana and make it difficult for her. But Chiasson, again, physical, lot of power, does a good job in terms of bullying her opponents, and I think that's what she'll be successful in doing here against Pani Kianzad. The only thing keeping me from being even more confident in the Chiasson side is I want to see her on the scales. I want to see her make 135 pounds and not look like death. And if this fight does end up being a catchweight once again, maybe it ends up playing in her favor as well. So I think honing in on this fight later in the week would be the better way to go about it. But I think it's just the lack of defensive grappling that we see from Kianzad that makes it so hard to be confident in her as a big favorite in this spot. So I'm going to go Chiasson, and I'm going to go with her to win this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up in the featherweight division, we got one of my brightest prospects in the UFC period, Christian Rodriguez, coming in at plus 165 at featherweight, going up against Isaac Dulgarian, who comes in at minus 190. Now let's start off on the Christian Rodriguez side, who's on a 3-fight winning streak, most recently handing Cameron Simon, I believe, his first professional loss. Rodriguez, normally a 135er, has struggled to make 135 pounds for a long time now, but the UFC sees the talent level in this kid and is telling him, or at least forcing him, to go up to 145 pounds, similar to what they did with Kelvin Gastelum back when Gastelum was struggling to make 170, was forced to fight at 185 pounds, and now Rodriguez is kind of having to do the same thing at 145. This kid is very talented. You go back and watch his fights, even from the amateur days. The first amateur fight you see of him, he's so disciplined, technical, very poised, shows veteran-like discipline and technique that you know that this kid was going to have a bright future once you really start to put his head in the game. I wish that he gets the weight cutting issues out of the way here, because I think that's really holding him back from being really successful, because I think he'll have to be at 135 pounds for him to have real true success. But he's still very good in terms of his takedown defense, his ability to cause disruptions off of his back, even if he is taken down, reversals, submission attempts, get-ups, all high level. But it's just really his striking, his timing, his combinations, his speed, his accuracy. He has some stinging power as well. This kid is very talented all around. It's just the weight issues that we got to get back in check. His lone defeat came in a short notice UFC bout where he was forced to fight up a weight class against Jonathan Pearce, and he was making that a very close fight, even though Pearce was a huge favorite in that matchup. Rodriguez was forcing Pearce to work throughout that fight, and you could even see Pearce struggling to maintain position and control him from those top spots. Now, his opponent this weekend, Isaac Dulgarian, has never suffered defeat through his amateur or professional career. Not only has he never suffered defeat, he has never seen the second round because he has dominated every single one of his opponents by taking them to the ground and smashing them from on top, either submitting them or TKOing them. Last time around was his UFC debut, where he pounded out Francis Marshall from the top position, landing nasty elbows, cutting him up, and then finishing him in the last minute of that first round. He's very strong, very difficult to deal with, especially when he gets his wrestling going. We don't really see much of his striking game at all because all of his fights hit the ground within the first minute of each time, allowing him to just establish that top control. It's not often at all, probably never, you've seen his opponents work back to their feet or try to pull off a reversal because he is so heavy from that top control. But I believe he is facing his toughest opponent today here in Christian Rodriguez. Rodriguez will surely provide resistance off of his back when Dulgarian inevitably lands takedowns. Then you have to wonder what Dulgarian's going to have to start thinking in the second and third rounds when we get into deeper waters, and potentially seeing Rodriguez go out there landing more damage and possibly even pulling off a submission in this spot. I think Rodriguez is better all around. It's just going to be the possible strength advantage that he'll have to face here in Dulgarian. I don't think Dulgarian can provide as heavy of a power or dominance from that top position as Jonathan Pearce did, as Pearce is definitely a bigger featherweight when we're talking about just strength and matching these guys up in terms of metrics. But Dulgarian will still be difficult to deal with from that top position, but you cannot count out the technical capabilities and just overall game from Rodriguez here. For sure, Dulgarian will get him to the ground, but I know for a fact we will see Rodriguez throwing up submissions off of his back, creating disruptions, offsetting the balance of Dulgarian, eventually working back to his feet, and then landing the better shots on the feet as well. I would have more confidence in Rodriguez if this was at 135 pounds, but I still have a good bit of confidence here. I got in on him at plus 150. He's up to plus 165, so it seems like there's some money coming in on the Dulgarian side, but I feel like we might see that level back out later on in fight week as people start to try to take advantage of some of the money coming in on Dulgarian and getting the better price on Rodriguez here. I may have pulled the trigger a little bit too early, but I'm just that confident in Rodriguez's skill set to provide the most resistance that Dulgarian has ever faced and potentially open up a finishing opportunity as well as Dulgarian starts to slow down, starts to fail on his takedown attempts, potentially even open up the neck for Rodriguez to take home a submission victory with him. So give me Rodriguez by sub round 2 or round 3. All right, moving over to the light heavyweight division, we got the veteran Ovince St. Preux coming in at plus 385, taking on the, I don't think we have to call him a prospect anymore. Kennedy Nzechukwu, who comes in at minus 510. Now, Ovince St. Preux is coming off of a knockout loss to Philippe Lins. It's been a long time since we've seen him inside the cage. He's 1-3 over his last 4 fights. Normally his last win over Shogun Rua was a very pedestrian approach. He stayed on the outside, used the teep kick up the middle, used his kicks from distance, and just stayed on his bicycle against a very aged and pretty much a retired Shogun Rua. Another good thing that Ovince St. Preux has is a check left hook as he's moving backwards. That has delivered on a couple knockout victories for him over guys like Shogun Rua way back in the day. Even his most recent knockout win over Alonzo Menafield back in 2020. But it's clear he's slowed down. His cardio is not good. His defensive grappling is not good. He has chin issues. It's not looking good for him. That's why it completely makes sense to me to see Kennedy and Nzechukwu in the minus 500 range. You can't completely count out Ovince St. Preux considering some of the knockout power that he could showcase and considering that Nzechukwu is coming off of a knockout loss against a guy that doesn't really provide knockouts. But Nzechukwu is way closer to his prime than OSP is at this point in time, but I'm just not super confident in taking the minus 500. The under 1.5 around that minus 140 range is somewhat enticing. I feel like we'll see Kennedy just press the gas right off the jump, really try to overwhelm OSP similar to what Philippe Lins was able to do, and that could provide a quick finish here for Nzechukwu. But I think no matter how Nzechukwu looks to attack this fight, he should have almost all the advantages here. The speed advantage, the power advantage, the grappling advantage, maybe not pure submission advantage, but just being able to implement a grapple-heavy approach. If that's what he wants to do, he could possibly be successful with it, and I think he has the cardio edge in this matchup as well. So give me Nzechukwu. I think this happens quick. I think he gets him out of there, probably first round knockout. All right, that brings us to our co-main event. A weird fight to be in the co-main event, in my opinion, but seems like the UFC wants to get behind one of these guys. We got Brian Battle coming in at minus 170, going up against Loosa, who comes in at plus 145. Now, let's start off on the Brian Battle side, who's on a 2-fight winning streak where he's finished both of his last opponents, the first of which was Gabe Green, who he finished in less than a minute, considering that Gabe put his foot on the gas right from jump and tried to get Battle out of there, but suffered for it greatly as he left himself susceptible to getting countered and put out, as Battle was able to do to him. And then last time around, we saw AJ Fletcher have some decent success with some grinding, keeping Battle on his back foot, keeping Battle on the defensive until Battle was able to land a takedown of his own in the second round and eventually sink in a choke to get the submission victory. Battle at 185 pounds was a guy that utilized a volume-heavy approach, tried to break his opponents with pressure and forward movement, but we've seen him kind of muzzled at 180 or 170 pounds, whether it's been from the grapple-heavy approach from Renat Fakhretdinov or his ability to just go out there and finish dudes pretty quickly like he did against Takashi Sato and Gabe Green. I still have my question marks about what he looks like at 170 pounds when he's in a normal fight. And that's what he's going to get here against the guy in Loosa, who will likely be trying to use his power punching approach to hurt Brian Battle, but also his grapple-heavy approach to wear on Battle as well. Loosa is a guy that used to rely on his power punching to knock opponents out and get them out of there, but we're seeing him initiate some grappling so that he can make fights go longer, be healthier and more efficient as fights go into deeper waters, and that's what he might attempt to do here against Brian Battle. I think Battle is technically much better all around here, but I still have my question marks of him again at 170 pounds. It looks like he very much struggles to make this weight, and I think that's impeding his ability to showcase the style that made him so successful at 185 pounds. And I think Loosa is a guy that has the power to hurt him and potentially just put him away, just if, Battle is not fully recovered from the weight cut that he has to put himself through. Or Loosa could just be more powerful in the clinch exchanges and grappling exchanges that Battle's unable to get off on much of his own success. And I think Loosa has a decent enough gas tank to go 15 minutes if he needs to here. I think on the entire card, this is the one that I am least confident in, but I'm going to have to go with Loosa ever so slightly. I think we'll see him keep Battle on the defensive for most of this fight, and as long as Loosa does not get put out or choked out in this matchup, he should be able to keep the pressure, keep the activity high enough to really just outwork Brian here and win this fight on the scorecards. But again, very low confidence. All right. That brings us to our heavyweight main event here, where we have Tai Tuivasa coming in at -125, riding a 3-fight losing streak as he goes up against Marcin Tybura, who comes in at +105, who's coming off of a knockout loss to Tom Aspinall. Now, let's start off on the Tai Tuivasa side, who, like I said, is on a 3-fight losing streak, in which he's been finished in every single one of them. Normally, we see Tuivasa go out there and put his big hands on his opponents, knock them out pretty quickly, and just call it a day. He also has some decent leg kicks that he implements, chewing up the calf of his opponents, slowing them down so that he can have an easier target to hit when he lets go with his big power punching style. You don't often see him look to go to the wrestling clinch or the grappling because he's so confident in his striking and his ability to put opponents out that he's just fine with going out there and striking with these guys. But you see him come up short against guys that are technically better than him, like Cyril Gane, guys that have more explosivity and more power than him, like Sergey Pavlovich, and then guys that are just, again, much better overall, like Alexander Volkov showcased last time around, pulling off an Ezekiel choke to get Tai Tuivasa out of there. I wanted to say Tybura, but we haven't gotten to Tybura yet. But we might as well get to Tybura now. Tybura is coming off that knockout loss to Tom Aspinall last summer, where he showed that guys that are better than him from a physical standpoint will likely be able to get the better of him more often than not. Just look at his last couple of losses, right? The Alexander Volkov loss, close fight. He had an argument of potentially even winning that fight, but guys that are more explosive and faster than him and have better physicality than him will be able to kind of nullify the all-around approach that Tybura normally brings to the table. And we saw that on full display against Tom Aspinall, who was able to get him out of there, 60 to 70 seconds into that matchup. But we've seen his chin overall pretty much improved from earlier on in his career. He's taking shots from guys like Walt Harris, from Greg Hardy, from there's another name from earlier during this run that he's currently on that were unable to put him out, which allowed Tybura to go out there and showcase his overall MMA game. He strikes well, he grapples well, he clinches well, he wrestles well, and then when he gets to the top position, I believe he's a BJJ brown belt or possibly a black belt by this point in time, but he does a good job in terms of controlling his opponents on the mat. He's very skilled all around. It's just unfortunate that he's 38 years old, and physically speaking, he'll never be at the level of the guys like the Cyril Ganes or the Tom Aspinalls or any of the other top guys that are going to be at the Sergey Pavloviches. Those guys will be able to finish Tybura. But I think he's lucky in this matchup that he's going up against a guy in Tuivasa who kind of telegraphs his shots a lot more than guys like Tom Aspinall do. This should allow Tybura to either clinch up with Tuivasa, push him against the cage, wear on him, drag him to the ground, and do some good work from on top, or at least utilize a volume-heavy approach from distance, and he has more experience over 25 minutes than we've seen from Tuivasa. Tuivasa needs a knockout in this matchup for him to get his hand raised. He might be able to do so. He might be able to slow down Tybura with some calf kicks, with some leg kicks, but I think that we'll see Tybura either check those, nullify those by keeping Tuivasa on his back foot the entire time, or even engage in the grappling often enough to keep Tuivasa in a position that he can't get off on his power. So I like Tybura here, especially as the underdog. He is the better fighter overall. But at heavyweight, knockouts are absolutely always on the table. I just don't think at plus 105, that you can take a shot on a guy like Tybura, who, again, in my opinion, better overall, way more paths to victory, better gas tank, better experience over 25 minutes. I think we see Tybura bring this down to his pace, his level, and that should allow him to just slow this fight down and win it over the course of 25 minutes and win it on the scorecards. So once again, give me Marcin Tybura by decision. There you guys go. breakdowns for all 13 fights for this UFC Vegas 88 card. Again, I appreciate you guys with your patience in regards to having this drop on Tuesday rather than the usual Monday, where we get back on schedule for next week. Just needed a day to just recharge. Let's just put it that way. But I'm glad to get back on the horse. We have 3 regional events going down this weekend. Reminder, Cage Warriors on Friday, Cage Warriors on Saturday as well as KSW. If you want written breakdowns for those, you can find that on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Link for that is in the description below. Otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow for a double header segment that I got coming your way. The top 3 Lock of the Night candidates, as well as the top 3 Dog of the Night candidates. I'll see you guys then. Peace.